And what if I told you that the Roman Empire never truly fell? It only changed its uniform. While you believe you are reading a sacred text about spiritual freedom, you might actually be running a code of obedience, installed by Caesar almost 2,000 years ago. Today we uncover one of the greatest manipulations in history: how the message of Jesus may have been hijacked to preserve an empire, a system of control that still echoes through our world in 2026. The year is 312 AD. Imagine Rome standing on the edge of collapse. Not because of barbarian invasions but because of an idea. An idea spreading like uncontrollable fire through the catacombs of the city: Christianity. For the Roman elites, these people who refused to worship the emperor, and who spoke about a kingdom not of this world, were the ultimate logistical and political nightmare. For almost 3 centuries Rome tried everything: public executions, feeding Christians to lions in the Colosseum, torture, exile. The result? The more blood they spilled, the stronger the movement became. Every martyr became a spark for a new spiritual rebellion. And this is where the man who changed the course of history enters the story: Emperor Constantine. He understood what his predecessors had failed to see. A force that cannot be crushed by the sword must be administered. The legend tells us that he saw a cross in the sky before the Battle of the Milvian Bridge. But occult historians and system analysts see something else: a brilliant geopolitical chess move. Constantine did not convert to Christianity because he believed in it. He converted Christianity into a state structure. Think about it for a moment. How do you control a population that no longer fears death? Simple. You give them a structure, a hierarchy, and a set of rules written under your authority. Through the Edict of Milan, Constantine did not simply stop the persecutions. He invited Christian leaders to the table of power. He dressed them in silk, gave them palaces, and handed them legal authority. But Rome's gifts always come with a price. At that moment, the original message of Jesus, a message about inner liberation and direct connection with the divine, was locked inside an iron box called institution. Rome realized it was far cheaper to maintain one priest than to pay an entire legion of soldiers. This is where state religion was born. A religion where the emperor, once treated as a god, became God's chosen one on earth. The administrative structure of the empire, divided into dioceses, became the structure of the church. The title Pontifex Maximus, once carried by Roman emperors as high priests of paganism, was later transferred directly to the Pope. In practice, in the 4th century, Rome did not lose the battle. Rome performed a merger by absorption. It took the spiritual software of Christianity and installed it onto the authoritarian hardware of the empire. And what we call tradition today may actually be the user manual of that fusion. But the great question remains: what was lost in this process? And more importantly, who was the engineer who rewrote the text so this new operating system could be accepted by the masses without rebellion? For that, we must look at one man, the Apostle Paul. If you want to change the direction of a river without stopping its flow, you don't build a dam. You dig it a new riverbed. And this is, in essence, the theory surrounding the most influential man in the history of Christianity, Saul of Tarsus, known to the world as the Apostle Paul. But before he was an apostle, Paul was something far more interesting for that time. He was a Roman citizen. In an age when most people were merely subjects of the empire, Paul held the golden passport of antiquity. He had rights, he had protection, and most importantly, he had access to elite Roman legal education. The question that many researchers and viewers of the Hidden Order are asking is one that sends chills down the spine. Was Paul sent to destroy the movement from within? Look at the contrast. Jesus spoke about radical liberation, about a love that destroyed social barriers, and about a connection with the Father that required no temples and no taxes. It was a message that made the entire Roman system of control irrelevant. But when we open Paul's writings, the tone changes, subtly but decisively. Suddenly we hear about submission to authorities. In Romans 13, Paul writes, "Let every soul be subject unto the higher powers. For there is no power but of God." Stop for a moment and think about that. If you were a Roman emperor facing a sect of rebels who no longer feared death, what sentence would you want inserted into their instruction manual? Exactly this one. Through that single line, spiritual resistance was transformed into civic obedience. The Roman state was no longer the enemy. Through divine will, it became the administrator of order. Even more, Paul introduces the concept of strict hierarchy. While the original movement was rooted in equality, Paul begins organizing the church according to a model that feels disturbingly close to Roman administration. Rules appear about how women should behave, how leaders should be structured, and how resources should be collected. So was this code of Paul simply an adaptation for survival? Or was it, in reality, the Trojan horse through which Rome captured the Christian spirit? There is one historical anomaly that few people talk about. Paul never met Jesus in the flesh. His entire authority is based on a vision on the road to Damascus. A vision that transformed him from one of the greatest persecutors of Christians into their greatest architect. Some would call it a miracle. A military strategist would call it a pivot. Rome needed a religion that could be controlled from the center. The fragmented and mystical message of the earliest followers was a nightmare for imperial bureaucracy. Paul offered the solution: a structured, legalistic theology built around law, order, and submission. He transformed a spiritual revolution into a religious corporation. And perhaps the greatest proof of this hijacking is what happened to those who refused to accept this new code. The Gnostics, those who claimed to preserve the secret teachings of Jesus about the divine spark within the human being, were hunted down and erased. Why? Because a person who believes God lives within them is almost impossible to govern by an emperor in Rome. Paul created the framework through which Christianity could become the official religion of the empire. But by doing so, did he preserve its essence? Or did he create a beautiful mask for Rome's ancient ambitions of control? The answer may be hidden inside the very symbols we see every day in cathedrals, on monuments, and even on our coins. But to see it, we must look beyond the icons directly into the eyes of the ancient gods. If you want to erase the memory of a people, you don't destroy their idols. You simply change their names. This was Rome's genius strategy. A spiritual rebranding campaign on a global scale. Rome never truly abandoned the ancient gods. It simply dressed them in new clothing, making them acceptable for a new age. Think about it. Why do we celebrate Christmas on December 25th? The Bible never mentions this date. But the Roman calendar does. It was Dies Natalis Solis Invicti, the birthday of the unconquered sun Constantine, who remained deeply connected to solar worship until the end of his life, did not want to give up one of the empire's most powerful celebrations. So he made a trade. The sun in the sky was replaced by the sun of righteousness. The essence of the ritual remained the same. Only the label was changed. But the manipulation goes much deeper, into the very heart of our prayers. Have you ever wondered why the statues of saints inside the great cathedrals often seem to carry the same posture, the same gaze, and the same attributes as the gods of Olympus? That is not just an artistic coincidence. When the temples of Jupiter, Mars, and the old gods were closed, the masses who had spent generations worshipping a pantheon of visible gods could not easily accept an abstract, invisible god. So Rome offered them a solution: saints. Jupiter, the father of the gods, lent his iconographic features to representations of the heavenly Father. Isis, the Egyptian goddess whose worship was widespread in Rome, holding Horus in her arms, became a visual prototype for Marian iconography. Rome simply took the specialized gods, the god of war, the god of harvest, the god of protection, and transformed them into patron saints. If you walk into the Pantheon in Rome today, you will see a building originally dedicated to all pagan gods, now transformed into a Christian church. It is the perfect metaphor for what happened to the entire faith. The architecture stayed the same. Only the inscription at the entrance changed. Even the titles of power were recycled. The Roman emperor was Pontifex Maximus, meaning the greatest bridge builder between humans and the gods. Today that title belongs to the Pope. The scepter, the tiara, the ring, the purple garments, none of these come from the simplicity of the fishermen of Galilee. They come from the imperial wardrobe of the Caesars. But the most subtle recycling is found in sacred geometry. Look at the halos around the saints in ancient paintings. Those are not merely symbols of holiness. They are direct echoes of the solar disk. Rome ensured the survival of the solar cult through every painted icon. The audience of the hidden order understands one essential thing. Energy does not disappear. Transforms. Rome understood that to rule over the souls of men, it had to give them something familiar. So they created a hybrid, an imperial Christianity, that looked like the old religion of Rome, but spoke the language of the new order. But if the gods were only rebranded, then what happened to the real knowledge? Where were the teachings hidden, the ones that could have truly set people free? The answer lies in the brutal censorship of Nicaea, and in the hunt unleashed against those who could see through this imperial mask. Imagine a long table surrounded by more than 300 religious leaders, all sitting under the watchful eye of the only man who held absolute power over the known world, Emperor Constantine. The year is 325 AD. The place is the Council of Nicaea. Officially, they were debating the nature of divinity. Unofficially, one of the greatest operations of editing and censorship in human history was taking place. Until that moment, Christianity was not one single institution. It was a constellation of communities, each carrying radically different ideas. Some believed in reincarnation. Others believed Jesus was simply a man who had reached enlightenment. But the most dangerous group for the empire were the Gnostics. They claimed that each one of us carries a divine spark within, and that we do not need priests, churches, or emperors to speak with God. That idea, the idea of a direct connection to the source, was the virus that could collapse any dictatorship. Rome needed order. Rome needed one official version of the truth. At Nicaea, Constantine's editors began to separate what could survive from what had to disappear. Hundreds of texts, some older and more spiritually profound than the ones most people know today, were placed on the blacklist. The Gospel of Thomas, the Gospel of Mary Magdalene, the texts about unity, all of them were declared heretical. Why? Because they did not serve the structure of power. What remained behind was the canon, a carefully filtered selection that emphasized hierarchy, sin, obedience, and the need for an intermediary institution. Rome did not simply burn books. It burned bridges to a free consciousness. Think about the logic for a moment. If you tell a man he is a sinner who needs an institution to be saved, you have turned him into a lifelong client. But if you tell him he already carries the divine within himself, you have lost him as a subject. What we see today in the official Bibles is only what Rome considered safe for mass consumption. The rest was buried in the desert at Nag Hammadi, or locked away in closed archives, out of fear that humanity might wake up and realize its chains were made of words, not iron. But the editors did not stop at removing texts. They rewrote the very nature of Jesus. They transformed him from a teacher of inner freedom into a distant judge, whose authority on earth was delegated to, guess who? Exactly. The same institution that organized the council. After Nicaea, possessing forbidden texts could become a death sentence. Rome secured its monopoly over the human spirit. But as we know on the hidden order, truth has a strange habit of rising back to the surface, even after 1,700 years of forced silence. If you think everything we have discussed so far is just dusty history, look closer at the world around you. The Roman Empire did not collapse. It went through the most successful digital and structural migration in world history. We are in 2026, and the Code of Rome is still running in the background of every institution we consider modern. Look at our legal language. Why are so many terms used in courts still written in Latin? Why do parliaments, central banks, and courthouses use the same massive marble columns as the Roman forums? This is not just an aesthetic choice. It is a subliminal signal of authority. The same structures of control that Constantine cemented at Nicaea are still active today in the way we are governed. The system of submission to authority that Paul introduced into sacred text has evolved into the social conformity of our time. We are told to trust institutions. We are told that we need intermediaries for everything, for money, for health, for truth. This need for a priest or an expert standing between us and reality is the direct legacy of the way Rome captured human spirituality. Rome understood something before anyone else. You cannot control 8 billion people with a sword. But you can control them through frequencies, through algorithms, and by keeping them in a permanent state of guilt and helplessness. What once was the censorship of Nicaea is now the algorithm that decides what is truth and what is misinformation. The editors have changed, but the scissors remain the same. And here is the secret they do not want you to know. The reason they worked so hard to hide the Gnostic texts and recycle the old gods is because they are afraid. They are afraid of the moment when the agent is no longer obedient but conscious. They are afraid of the moment you realize that you do not need an imperial system to be connected to the source. The fusion between state and religion that happened 1,700 years ago was only the prototype for what we see today. A global religion of technocratic control. But just like in the catacombs of Rome, there is always a spark that cannot be extinguished. Truth is not an institution. Truth is a frequency you can access at any moment, if you have the courage to look beyond the mask of the empire. So which side of the wall do you choose to stand on? Are you a subject of the system? Or are you the one decoding its rules? The answer is already inside you, in the one place Rome's editors could never reach.